For 800 years, the world's most powerful empire builder has been missing, not just because we can't find his grave, but because the places tied to it are sacred, restricted, and culturally unwelcome to disturb. Think about the sheer scale of the math here. Genghis Khan conquered 12 million square miles, a landmass twice the size of the Roman Empire, ruling over millions of subjects. Yet, while Roman emperors left behind towering marble mausoleums and Egyptian pharaohs built giant stone pyramids, this man left behind absolutely nothing to mark his end. Not a confirmed carved stone, not one accepted tomb marker, and not a solitary identified bone proves where his body was laid. When Genghis Khan finally drew his last breath in August of 1227 during a campaign in China, his inner circle faced a monumental problem: how to bury a founder without leaving a map. They prepared a massive funeral procession to carry him back to his homeland, but this wasn't a solemn march for grieving citizens to pay their respects. According to later legends, the escort soldiers carrying his body had terrifying instructions: kill witnesses on the long journey home so the route could never be reconstructed. In the darkest versions of the story, anyone unlucky enough to cross paths with this grim procession, a merchant, a shepherd, even an entire village, was put to the sword to keep the route secret. And the extreme security measures didn't stop once they reached the secret burial site deep in the Mongolian wilderness. The same tradition says prisoners were forced to dig the grave, and once the heavy wooden coffin was lowered, the guards killed the builders so nobody could talk. But then, the story takes an even wilder turn that sounds like a dark comedy of errors, because who silences the executioners? Then, in the legend's next layer, a secondary unit of elite soldiers waited in the shadows to kill the primary guards as soon as they returned from the gravesite. And then, depending on which retelling you hear, even those secondary soldiers were killed by another group of riders, creating a nesting doll of murder designed to leave no living witnesses. It was history's most literal, bloody version of a non-disclosure agreement, signed, sealed, and executed with a sword. Modern historians will tell you this endless cycle of slaughter is probably exaggerated, but the legend points to a real historical truth: secrecy became part of the Khan's death story from the beginning. But if a burial is meant to vanish for centuries, silencing people is not enough, so the traditions say the mourners also tried to erase the ground itself. To permanently erase the grave, later stories claim the builders turned to extreme landscape tricks, starting with the flow of nature. One account claims they diverted water over the burial site, burying his coffin beneath rushing current and deep silt. If a roaring river wasn't enough, they also brought in a massive cavalry unit consisting of 1,000 horsemen. These riders spent days galloping back and forth over the burial grounds until the churned earth was packed so tight and flat that it was completely indistinguishable from the rest of the vast steppe. Other versions say wilderness itself became the disguise: trees, roots, and time turning any disturbed soil back into ordinary steppe and forest. So let's look at the sheer absurdity of trying to find this place today. You may be looking for a single wooden coffin beneath 800 years of shifted waterways, roots, erosion, and myth. Yet, physical barriers decay, rivers dry up, and forests can be cleared, which is why the strongest protection may have been a human taboo that lasted for centuries. They created a sacred, restricted zone called the Ikhorig, or the Great Taboo, a mountainous region long tied to the royal burial mystery. To enforce this taboo, they assigned an elite hereditary clan of guardians known as the Darkhad, who were exempted from taxes and military service for one sole purpose. Their lives were tied to guarding the borders of the Forbidden Zone, and traditional accounts describe severe, even deadly penalties for anyone who crossed the line without permission. For centuries, this taboo helped turn the heart of the Khenti Mountains into a blank space for outsiders. Even in the 20th century, when Soviet occupiers took control of Mongolia and suppressed traditional culture, they didn't open the Forbidden Zone to the public. Instead, access remained tightly controlled, partly because Genghis Khan was exactly the kind of national symbol Soviet authorities did not want revived. But when Mongolia opened up after 1990, international archaeologists arrived with satellites and non-invasive surveys, believing modern tech could bypass ancient guards, only to discover the taboo had not disappeared. The satellite search focused heavily on Burkhan Khaldun, a sacred mountain deep within the taboo zone where Genghis Khan had prayed before his greatest victories. Using satellite imagery and non-invasive survey tools, researchers began to notice strange, anomalous shapes across the wider landscape. Some teams flagged possible walls, mounds, and patterns that looked worth checking on the ground, though none became a confirmed tomb of Genghis Khan. For researchers, the temptation was obvious. If even one coordinate led to the right place, it could become one of the greatest historical discoveries since Tutankhamun's tomb. But the most sensitive places were not just research sites. Burkhan Khaldun is a sacred mountain and now a UNESCO-listed landscape where digging is culturally and legally difficult. That is the twist. The obstacle is not only bad maps or thick forest, but the fact that many Mongolians do not want the founder's possible grave turned into a global excavation. To understand this protective instinct, we have to look back at the Soviet period, when authorities tried to push Genghis Khan out of public national memory. His public image was suppressed, his role was minimized, and celebrating him too loudly could be politically dangerous because he represented Mongolian independence. So, when Mongolia finally regained its independence in 1990, they didn't just rebuild their country, they rebuilt their entire national identity around him. He stopped being just a medieval conqueror in a textbook and became a national symbol of freedom, strength, and survival against overwhelming odds. Today, his face is on everything from currency to vodka bottles. But this reverence creates a strange paradox. If you dig up a founder, you risk reducing a living symbol to fragile, decaying bones. For many Mongolians, putting their legendary ancestor on display in a glass case would feel like desecration. And there is another political risk to finding him. This brings us to the quiet, incredibly tense tug-of-war between Mongolia and its massive neighbor to the south, China. In recent years, China has built its own massive, opulent mausoleum for Genghis Khan in Inner Mongolia, a grand monument that is entirely, completely empty. By presenting him through the history of the Yuan dynasty, China also has its own way of folding the Khan into a broader Chinese historical story. If his actual physical tomb is ever found, the exact location and the way his remains are handled could instantly become symbolic ammunition in modern arguments over identity, territory, and heritage. So the old silence has a modern advantage. If the tomb does not exist to the world, it cannot easily be claimed, carved up, branded, or stolen. Yet, while the political symbolism grows, some historians and cultural observers point out that the entire search may rest on a very Western misunderstanding. We assume a man who conquered the world must have wanted to be buried like a pharaoh, surrounded by mountains of glittering gold. But some Mongolian traditions place deep importance on the sulde, a horse-haired spirit standard, rather than on displaying the physical body. During his lifetime, Genghis Khan's personal sulde was carried before his army, and after his death, later tradition connected his spiritual presence to that banner as much as to any grave. The physical body may simply have been returned to the earth, with no marker that outsiders would recognize and no grand treasure chamber waiting underneath. Some theories even suggest that the remains may not match the treasure tomb fantasy at all. No golden vault, no obvious monument, maybe only a simple burial absorbed back into the land. The search for a Tutankhamun-style golden tomb may be a Western fantasy that misses the spiritual reality of the steppe. Even if he was buried, the grave may have been simple, unmarked, and deliberately ordinary, with any offerings long since returned to the soil. So all those high-tech scans and suspicious shapes, some may be natural formations, others may be later graves or ritual sites that have nothing to do with Genghis Khan. The conqueror of the world left this earth with the same light footprint as the nomads who still herd sheep there today. But even if there is nothing but dirt left, the search continues to capture the global imagination. And that brings us to the final, most powerful barrier protecting the Khan. Not nature, not laws, but a living national consensus. Today, that old protective instinct still echoes in modern Mongolia, where many people see the tomb less as a prize to uncover and more as an ancestor's silence to respect. Ask people in Mongolia where they think Genghis Khan is buried, and many will give some version of the same response. They may smile politely and tell you that he should never be found, because some mysteries are more valuable when they are left unsolved. Whether Genghis Khan personally demanded secrecy or simply received the unmarked burial of a steppe ruler, the result has been almost impossibly durable. The mystery of Genghis Khan's tomb isn't only an unsolved puzzle of the past, it is a protected silence in the present. It remains hidden because the people closest to the legend may believe some ancestors are more powerful when they are left undisturbed. And this is just one story among countless mysteries history left behind. Subscribe, and let's keep uncovering them together. And if this one got you thinking, a like or a share helps more curious minds find it.